Picture this. Dawn breaking gray and cold over a county fairground in a town so small it doesn't have a stoplight, and 60 motorcycles are already there, engines idling in a low, patient growl that sounds like something breathing. You would not have known what it meant. Not yet. Not standing at the edge of the gravel lot with your coffee going cold in your hand, watching leather-clad shoulders and gray beards and sun-cracked faces arrange themselves into a slow, deliberate circle around the chain-link fence, like something out of a dream you couldn't name. No shouting, no revving, just the engines, low and even, 60 of them breathing together in the blue half-light, and the smell of diesel and dew-wet grass, and somewhere behind the ticket booth, a funnel cake fryer clicking on for the first time that morning, oblivious. The townsfolk came in twos and threes, drawn by the sound the way people are drawn to a siren they can't place. They stood at a careful distance, a woman in a bathrobe, a man with his shirt only half buttoned, boots unlaced, a teenager filming on a phone held sideways, not understanding what he was filming, only that it mattered. Nobody asked the riders to explain themselves. There was something in the stillness of them, the way they sat their bikes without dismounting, gloved hands resting on handlebars, eyes forward, patches faded from years of weather stitched across their backs like old scripture, that told the crowd this was not a thing you interrupted. An old man near the front, his beard the color of ash, his knuckles scarred pale from something nobody there would ever ask about, kept his gaze fixed on the Ferris wheel standing dead and silent in the middle of the fairground, its cars swaying faintly in a wind nobody else could feel. A woman standing near the funnel cake stand said, low, to no one, "What happened here?" It wasn't a question. It came out flat, like she already knew there was an answer and was afraid of it. Because something had happened here. Something the whole town would spend the day learning, piece by piece. The way you learn a bruise is worse than you thought only when you press on it. By noon, there would be 61 riders, then more streaming in off the state highway, in twos and fours, gas tanks catching the sun. By evening, this gravel lot and this rusted midway would be something the town told its grandchildren about. But at dawn, all anyone had was the sound. 60 engines, low and steady, circling a fairground like a held breath. Whatever had happened here yesterday, it was not over. By nightfall, everyone in that town would understand exactly why these men had come, and exactly what it had cost to bring them. 3 days before any of that, Iron Ridge still had its ordinary face on. It was the kind of town that existed mostly in the past tense, a feed store, a diner with 2 burnt-out letters in its sign, a water tower somebody had painted blue in 1987 and never touched again. The county fair came once a year like a held breath of its own, and for 1 week the gravel lot behind the grain elevator filled with light and noise and the smell of fry oil, and everyone pretended, for a few hours, that the town was still what it used to be. He came through the gates a little after 6 that evening, pushing the wheelchair with both hands set wide on the grips, the way a man handles something he has learned, slowly and without complaint, to trust himself with. The vest he wore had seen 20 years of weather and did not apologize for any of it. His beard was gray in the way rope goes gray, not soft, just worn. His eyes did the thing they always did in a crowd, moved across it once, slow, cataloging exits, cataloging strangers, cataloging nothing in particular except everything. In front of him, small in the chair, sat his daughter. She had her hands folded in her lap the way she always did in public, like she was waiting to be handed something, and she was watching the lights come on over the midway with an attention that made her look older than 11. He leaned down without being asked and adjusted the thin blanket over her knees, even though the evening was warm, even though she hadn't shivered. "Funnel cake first," she said, "then the ring toss. You're terrible at the ring toss." "I'm not terrible." "You've never won anything." "I won you a fish once." "The fish died in the truck." He didn't answer that. He rarely answered the things that circled too close to the truck, the highway, the year that had rearranged both their lives into a before and an after. Instead, he pushed her forward, past the gate attendant who waved them through without charging admission, past a line of kids clutching tickets, into the noise and the grease smoke and the strings of yellow bulbs just beginning to hum awake against the dusk. People looked. People always looked. First at the chair, then at him, then away, quickly, as if caught at something. He had stopped minding that years ago, or told himself he had. What he minded, what he had never stopped minding, was the particular way she absorbed those looks without flinching, filing them somewhere he couldn't reach. The same patient stillness she'd worn in a hospital hallway years back, when a doctor had used the words permanent and adjust in the same sentence. He wheeled her toward the funnel cake stand, into the warm, sugar-smelling air, into the last ordinary hour either of them would have for a long time. The line moved slow, the way fair lines always did, a shuffle of boots and flip-flops, and the occasional stroller wheel catching in the trampled grass. He kept one hand on the back of the chair out of habit more than need. She could work the rims herself, had for 2 years now, forearms gone lean and corded in a way that surprised people who expected softness. But the hand stayed anyway, a tether he didn't examine too closely. Dust hung gold in the last sun, kicked up by 100 small feet, and under it the smell of oil and powdered sugar and the particular scorch of a deep fryer running too hot. Somewhere a generator thrummed beneath the calliope music of the carousel, off-key in the way carnival machines always were, like something remembered instead of played. She reached up, unprompted, and touched the small enamel pin fixed to the strap near her shoulder. A bluebird, chipped at one wing, the kind of cheap costume jewelry sold in drugstore spin racks decades ago. He'd watched her do it 100 mornings running, the same motion, thumb and forefinger finding it blind, the way another kid might touch a scar to make sure it was still there. She clipped it on before breakfast, before school, before anything. He had never asked why. There was an unspoken agreement between them that some things got asked about and some things didn't, and the pin belonged firmly to the second category, filed alongside the truck, the ice, the year that had split their lives cleanly in half. "They still got the ring toss?" she asked, eyes already scanning past the funnel cake line toward the flashing bulbs beyond. "Same one that ripped you off 2 years running. I was closer the second time." "You were not." A ghost of a smile, quick and gone, the kind she rationed, like she rationed most things now. Smiles, complaints, the small currencies of a childhood that had been cut short somewhere on a black stretch of 2-lane highway. He ordered the funnel cake without asking what she wanted, because he already knew, powdered sugar heavy, no strawberries, and while the girl behind the counter shook it from the paper carton, he watched his daughter's thumb find the pin again, a small unconscious benediction, and something in his chest pulled tight, the way it did every single time without fail, though he could not yet have said this particular evening would be the one that finally broke something loose. They ate at a picnic table scarred with decades of carved initials, powdered sugar drifting onto the chair's armrests, onto her lap, onto the fine hairs of her forearms, and for a few minutes the fare was only lights and grease and the ordinary bickering of a father and daughter who had survived something together. It would not last. Somewhere near the ring toss, a boy in a pressed shirt and new boots was already watching them cross the grass, already deciding, in the careless way of boys who have never been told no, exactly what he thought of what he saw. The rancher who owned 3,000 acres east of town moved through the fairground the way certain men move through spaces they believe already belong to them, unhurried, chin tilted at an angle that assumed clearance, one hand resting on his son's shoulder like a brand of ownership rather than affection. He wore a white hat that had never touched a fence post and boots polished to a shine that had nothing to do with work. People stepped aside for him before he asked them to, and he had long since stopped noticing that they did, the way a man stops noticing the sound of his own breathing. His son walked a half-step ahead, in the loose-limbed way of boys who have been told, in 100 small, unspoken ways, that the world will rearrange itself around their wanting. He was 15, tall for it, jaw still soft, but already practicing the flatness of expression he'd watched his father wear in bank offices and at auction blocks. Behind them trailed 3 other boys in fresh boots, laughing at something that didn't need to be funny, only loud. The midway narrowed near the ring-toss stall, where the crowd thickened into a slow current of shoulders and strollers, and cotton candy held aloft like torches. The boy and his friends spread themselves across the width of it without deciding to, the way water spreads without deciding, simply because nothing yet had told it not to. They stopped to watch a barker rig a prize wheel, blocking the narrow channel entirely, 4 boys wide where there was room for 2. The wheelchair came to a stop behind them. The girl's father did not speak at first. He had learned, across 2 years of curb cuts that ended in gravel, and doors that opened the wrong way, and strangers who stared a half-second too long, that most blockages resolved themselves if you waited, if you didn't make noise, if you let the world remember on its own that space existed on both sides of a body. He stood with his hand light on the push handles, patient as a man waiting out weather. The girl watched the boys' backs. She had already clocked the exact width of the gap they left, the way she clocked every gap in every room, out of a habit that had stopped feeling like vigilance and simply felt like living. Powdered sugar still clung faint and white to the crease of her knuckles. "Excuse us," her father said. Not loud, not sharp, just enough. None of the boys turned. One of them laughed at the barker's patter. The rancher, a few yards ahead, glanced back once, not at the family waiting in the dust behind his son, but past them, toward a man he recognized from the co-op board, already lifting a hand in greeting, already moving on, already certain that whatever held up the path behind him was small enough not to require his attention. The gap closed anyway, the way gaps always closed, boys drifting toward the funnel cake stand where the grease smell hung heavy and sweet in the August air, and the girl's father pushed her forward into the space they left, past the churned dust, past a trash can overflowing with paper boats gone translucent with oil. The line for funnel cake was long. Somebody's radio played tinny gospel from a truck bed. The girl watched the fryer basket lift, watched the powdered sugar sift down like something out of season, and for a moment she was only a child waiting for fried dough, nothing more complicated than that. Then the rancher's son turned around. He had a paper plate in one hand, sugar dusting his knuckles same as hers, and he looked at her the way boys look at things they've decided are safe to look at because no one has ever told them otherwise. He said something to the boy beside him, not quiet. Loud enough that 30 people could hear it without trying, loud enough that the woman behind the register glanced up, loud enough that a toddler 2 families over stopped crying just to listen. He called her a burden. He said it plain, the way a boy says a word he heard an adult say once and liked the weight of. Then he hunched his shoulders, curled his hands in front of his chest, jerked his head side to side in a loose, mocking imitation of something he didn't understand, wheels that weren't there, a body he'd decided was a joke because it moved differently than his. A few people laughed. Not many, enough. The girl didn't move. She had a long history of not moving in moments like this, a stillness she'd built the way other kids built forts, board by board, until it could hold weight. Powdered sugar sat on the crease of her knuckles, forgotten now. Her father's hands went still on the push handles, not clenched, not shaking, still, in the specific way a held breath is still, in the way a held breath is more dangerous than a shout, because it means the shout is being spent somewhere else, somewhere colder, somewhere with a longer memory. A vein moved once at his temple and then didn't again. He had spent 19 years learning what his hands did before his mouth caught up, and right now his hands were doing nothing, which was the loudest thing they had ever done. The rancher's son laughed again, pleased with the size of his audience, unaware that the quiet man behind the wheelchair had gone somewhere. No one at the fair had followed him yet, not to memory of the black ice, not yet, but close, circling it the way a hawk circles before it commits. And that 30 feet away, near the ring toss booth, a stranger with a phone already raised had found the exact right angle and had already pressed record. The woman near the ring toss booth was 68 years old, though nothing about her stance suggested age, feet planted, elbows tucked to steady the phone, thumb hovering over nothing because there was nothing left to press. She had taught 3rd grade for 31 years in a schoolhouse 2 towns over, had spent 3 decades learning to read a child's face the way other people read weather, and she read this one now, without needing to hear the words that had caused it. The girl's mouth had gone flat. Not trembling, flat, pressed into a line the way a door is pressed shut against wind. Her eyes had dropped to the funnel cake still balanced in her lap, to the powdered sugar on her knuckles, as if the paper plate were the only object left in the world that hadn't turned on her. The rancher's son said something else, quieter this time, meant only for the 2 or 3 boys flanking him, and they laughed the private laugh of people who have never once imagined themselves on the other side of a joke. Her father did not turn toward them. He crouched instead, one knee to the gravel, so that his eyes came level with hers, and for a moment the fair noise, the calliope, the tilt-a-whirl's grinding gears, a toddler somewhere shrieking with pure unbothered joy, seemed to recede behind glass. He didn't ask if she was all right. He had learned, across 4 years and more doctors' offices than he could count anymore, that asking a child if she is all right in front of an audience is its own small cruelty, a demand for performance dressed up as tenderness. Instead, he said, "Funnel cake's getting cold." It wasn't. It had gone cold minutes ago, but she looked up at him, and something in her face loosened by a fraction, the way a fist loosens before it fully opens, and she nodded. He stood. He took the handles. He turned the chair, smooth, unhurried, the same economical motion he used backing a bike out of a tight row at a rally, no wasted inch, and walked her away from the booth, past the ring toss, past the woman with the phone, who lowered it slightly as they passed, not from guilt, but from the instinct of someone who has spent her life protecting children from being looked at when looking hurts. He did not look at the rancher's son, did not give him the dignity of a glance, though every year he'd spent building his own control screamed to. The girl was quiet for 6 full minutes, unusual for her, and when she finally spoke, it was not about the boy at all. She asked if they could ride the Ferris wheel before dark, because from the top you could see all the way to the water tower, and she liked seeing things from up high, where the ground couldn't reach her. Behind them, the woman with the phone was already thumbing toward a share icon, her finger steady, her jaw set in the particular way of someone who has decided, quietly and completely, that this is not going to stay small. The Ferris wheel had come and gone by the time the fairgrounds thinned to generator hum, and the smell of grease going cold in the fryers. He'd carried her back to the trailer himself, her wheelchair folded and lashed to the truck bed, her small body loose with the particular exhaustion of a child who has spent all her fear in one afternoon and has none left for bedtime. She was asleep before the door latched. He stood outside a long while after, in the lot behind the grandstand where the light didn't reach, and did not go in. The night had turned the kind of cool that only came after a day that hot, air moving off the stubble fields with a smell like cut wheat and diesel, and he sat on the tailgate with his forearms on his knees and did not smoke, though his hand kept finding the shirt pocket where the pack used to sit before he quit, 4 years back, for her, because a man raising a child alone could not afford the years a habit like that cost him. Boots on gravel, unhurried, a walk he'd know blind. The sergeant-at-arms lowered himself onto the tailgate without being asked, the way he always had, going back to before either of them wore the patches they wore now. 3 years the man had been carrying the gavel and the discipline of the chapter, and 3 years he had also been carrying something else, something that lived in the careful way he never asked about the accident, never once, not at the funeral, not after, not in 3 years of long rides where silence would have been the easiest place in the world to ask. "Heard about the boy," he said. Not a question. "Heard right. You didn't put a hand on him." "No." The sergeant nodded slowly, the kind of nod a man gives when he already knew the answer and was only confirming it out loud so it would be real between them. He looked out at the dark shape of the trailer, at the small window where her nightlight burned a soft orange behind the curtain, and something moved through his jaw that he swallowed before it became words. "You ever think about telling her," he said, "the rest of it?" Mac did not answer right away. The wind picked up loose gravel dust and dropped it. Somewhere behind them a generator sputtered and caught again. "The rest of what?" Mac said, though his voice had gone flat and careful. A man stepping onto ice he already knew was thin. The sergeant looked at him a long moment, weighing something he had weighed 100 nights before, and set back down every time. "Nothing," he said finally. "Forget it." But his eyes stayed on the trailer window a beat too long, and Mac felt, not for the first time, that the man beside him knew something about that black ice night, 3 years back, that he himself had never said out loud to anyone at all. The memory did not arrive the way memories are supposed to arrive, softly, at the edges. It came the way the ice had come, all at once, no warning, the road simply gone from under him. Route 9, 3 years back. Late February, the kind of cold that makes the trees crack like gunshots somewhere off in the dark. He had been riding since 4 that morning, a run down to the coast and back for a club matter that no longer mattered, that he could not now, sitting on this tailgate with a man who knew too much, even remember the shape of. 14 hours in the saddle, his hands numb inside his gloves by the 9th. He had told himself he was fine. He had told her he was fine when he called from the last gas stop, and she had said, "Come home, we'll wait up," and there had been a laugh in her voice he had not heard in weeks. She was in the passenger seat because the truck's heater worked and the bike's did not, because she had driven out to meet him partway, because that was the kind of woman she was, the kind who drove 40 minutes on a black night rather than let him finish the run alone. The girl was asleep in the back, or he had thought she was asleep. Later he would learn she had been awake the whole time, watching the reflectors slide by outside her window, counting them the way children count things when they cannot sleep and do not want to say so. He remembered the radio was on low. He remembered her hand on his knee, not gripping, just resting there, warm through the denim. He remembered thinking that he could rest his eyes for 1 second at the next straight stretch, just 1 second, and that thinking it should have been enough to stop him from doing it. He did not remember the ice. That was the strange mercy of it, if it was mercy at all. One moment the world was a dark ribbon of asphalt lit by his own high beams, and the next the truck was somewhere it should not have been, sideways, weightless, the guardrail rising up gray and sudden, like something surfacing from deep water. He remembered sound before he remembered anything else. Metal folding. Her voice cut off mid-syllable, and after that, a silence so complete it had never fully left him, 3 years on, even now, even sitting on a tailgate in August with cicadas going and a man beside him who had pulled him out of that truck with his own 2 hands. He came back to the present slowly, the way a diver comes up through layers of colder and colder water. The sergeant was watching him. "You went somewhere," the sergeant said. "I know where I went," Max said, and did not say anything more. The sergeant let the silence sit a while, the way men do who have learned that silence is not empty, only full of things nobody wants to carry alone. Then he reached into his vest and set his phone on the tailgate between them, screen up, already lit. "You need to see this," he said. The video had been posted at 4:12 in the afternoon, time-stamped in the corner of the frame like a small confession. By 4:40, it had reached the diner 2 blocks off the fairground square, passed hand to hand across a counter where 3 retired ranch hands sat over coffee going cold. By 5:15, it had crossed the county line east, into a body shop with a single mechanic and a radio tuned to gospel, who watched it twice before he called his brother. By 6 o'clock, it was in a bar in the next town over, playing on a phone, propped against a beer bottle, while men who had never met the girl in the wheelchair went quiet in a way bars rarely go quiet. By 7:30, it had reached a chapter house 90 miles south, where a road captain watched it standing up, phone held at arm's length like something that might burn him. By 9 o'clock, it was in 4 counties. By midnight, it had a name attached that meant something to men who wore patches, not the boy's name, not yet, but the club's, the vice president's, the girl's. Comment after comment, the same 3 or 4 words repeating like a struck bell. "That's Iron Ridge. That's their VP's girl." Somebody typed it from a gas station 40 minutes from where the sergeant now sat, with a phone glowing between 2 men who had not moved. By 3 a.m., it had 11,000 views, and every one of them was someone somewhere putting down what they were holding, a beer, a wrench, a spoon over a sink, and going still. By dawn, the number was past 60,000, and it was no longer only the video, it was calls, it was texts with 3 words and a location. It was men who had ridden together 20 years ago and hadn't spoken in 5, suddenly speaking again, saying the same thing to each other in different words. "We're going." 11 hours, start to finish, From a schoolteacher shaking hands at a funnel cake stand to 100 phones lighting up in the dark like something migratory finding its direction. The sergeant watched the vice president's face while the video played, watched him watch his daughter get called a burden in a voice thick with the kind of contempt that comes easy to people who have never had to carry anything. He watched him not flinch. He had seen that kind of stillness before, in men holding a line they knew better than to break. "They know," the sergeant said, "all of them, tonight." The vice president closed the phone himself, gently, like something that might still be sleeping. "Then they'll be here in the morning," he said. The kitchen light above the stove was the only one burning in the house, and it fell yellow across the table where the two men sat, with their elbows nearly touching and nothing between them but a phone gone dark on purpose. Outside, the wind worked at the porch screen the way it had all summer, patient, testing the same corner, and somewhere down the road a dog barked twice and quit. He had made coffee neither of them wanted. It sat cooling between them like something set down and forgotten, the way a lot of things got set down and forgotten in that house since the accident, since the wheelchair, since the long nights of not saying what needed saying. The sergeant turned his cup a quarter turn on the table without lifting it. "I saw it," he said. "Twice. Then I couldn't watch it again." He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the window, at his own reflection ghosted over the dark yard, and for a moment, the sergeant thought he hadn't heard. "I know," he finally said. "What are you going to do?" The question sat there the way the coffee sat there. Outside, the wind found a new place on the screen and worked at that instead. "Nothing," he said. The sergeant's jaw worked once, a small motion, the kind a man makes when he's deciding whether to push. He had known him 19 years, through the funeral for his wife, through the hospital corridor that still showed up in his own dreams, sometimes though it wasn't his daughter in that bed, and he had learned there were two kinds of quiet the man carried. One was the quiet before he did something. The other was the quiet of a man who had already decided the world would do the deciding for him. "Nothing," the sergeant repeated, testing the word for a crack in it. "The club'll decide," he said. "They already are. You felt your phone tonight, same as I felt mine." "That's not what I asked." "I know what you asked." He turned the cup, finally, and drank from it, though it had gone cold an hour ago. "You want me to tell you I'm going to ride over there and put my hands on that boy's father. Feels good to think it. Wouldn't fix a thing that's broken." "Something's got to be done." "Something is being done," he said. "It's being done in Bakersfield right now, and in Barstow, and in a garage in Fresno, where a man I haven't talked to since his brother's funeral is probably standing over his bike, deciding what time to leave. That's not me doing anything. That's 60,000 people deciding a girl in a wheelchair matters more than they thought she did an hour ago." The sergeant sat with that. Outside, the wind quit the screen altogether, and the kitchen went still enough that the refrigerator's hum sounded loud. "And Josie," the sergeant said, "what do you tell her in the morning?" He looked toward the hallway, toward the closed door at the end of it, behind which, he hoped, she was finally sleeping. "Nothing yet," he said. "Tomorrow she won't need telling. Tomorrow she'll be able to see it." The sergeant didn't answer right away. He set his own cup down on the counter, careful, like it might crack if he let it drop the last inch. Then he looked at the window instead of at the man across from him, and that was how he always looked when he was about to say something he'd been carrying a long time. "There's something you don't know," he said, "about that night." The refrigerator hummed. Neither man moved. "I was riding behind you," the sergeant said. "Not beside, behind, close enough to see your tail light go sideways before it went dark." He turned the cup a quarter turn, an old habit, though there was nothing left in it to settle. "By the time I got the bike down and got to you, you weren't moving. Weren't hurt, not the kind you could see, just sitting there, in the glass, in the road. I don't remember that part." "I know you don't." The sergeant's voice didn't rise. "You sat there 20 minutes before I called it in. I want you to hear that number. 20 minutes. I had the phone in my hand the whole time, and I didn't dial, because you looked at me once and I understood, not with words, you didn't say a word, that you needed those minutes more than she needed the ambulance to come 6 seconds faster. I made a decision that night nobody gave me the right to make. I've carried it since. Haven't told a living soul. Not my wife, not the club, not you." The man across the table had gone very still, the way he went still before a hard piece of news, the way a man braces without knowing yet what he's bracing for. "Why now?" he said. "Because tomorrow, 60 riders are going to walk that girl through a fairground like she's the only thing in it that matters, and you're going to stand there and let them, and somewhere in that, you're going to start thinking you don't deserve to watch it happen. I know that look. I've watched you wear it for 4 years." The sergeant leaned forward, elbows on the table, and for once, his face carried none of the careful blankness he wore on the road. "You didn't leave her in that road. You sat with her. That's the part you don't remember, and it's the part that matters most, and I let it go unsaid a hell of a lot longer than I should have." Outside, far off, a single set of headlights swept the gravel and kept going, some neighbor's truck heading home late, indifferent to the kitchen and what was being confessed in it. 20 minutes, the man said again, quiet, testing the shape of it in his mouth, like it might explain something he'd spent 4 years failing to explain to himself. 20 minutes, the sergeant said, and then I called. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The wind had nothing left to say either, and behind the closed door down the hall, the girl who did not yet know any of this slept on, unaware that in the morning the road itself was about to be rewritten. The sergeant left a little after 2, and the man did not walk him to the truck. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the taillights shrink down the drive, and when they were gone, he did not go to bed. He went instead to the shelf above the wood stove, where a single frame stood between a coffee can of nails and a chipped mug full of pens nobody used anymore, and he took it down the way he did maybe twice a year, careful, like it might come apart in his hands. Her face in the photograph was laughing at something outside the frame. She had that habit, laughing before the joke finished, like she already trusted it would be funny. He had loved that about her before he understood it was also a kind of faith, the same faith she'd had in him on a black road in February, riding home from a job 3 counties over, because he'd told her he was fine to make the last stretch, and she had believed him, because believing him was easier than the alternative. He set the frame on the table and sat down across from it like it might answer him. 4 years he had built a version of that night for his daughter. A patch of ice, bad luck, nobody's fault, the kind of story a child could carry without it crushing her. He had told it so many times he had almost climbed inside it himself. 20 minutes was the part he'd kept out, the part where he'd sat in the wreck of the truck with his wife already gone and his daughter's breathing gone shallow, and he had not called, had not moved, had simply sat, because some animal part of him had needed 20 minutes to decide he was still capable of being a father before he could act like one. The kindness, he had told himself, was in not telling her that. But he thought now of the sergeant's face across this same table, and the plain, flat weight in his voice when he'd said the words like they cost him something to hand over. And he thought of his daughter down the hall, 11 years old, quicker to read a room than most grown men he rode with, and he wondered, not for the first time, but for the first time without flinching from it, whether what he called protecting her was really protecting himself, whether the story he'd built was a kindness to her chair, her scars, her nights, or a kindness to the 20 minutes he could not forgive. He set the photograph back on the shelf, facing out, the way she used to like it. Somewhere down the hall a door creaked, small, and he went still, listening, the way he'd learned to listen to weather before it turned, and did not yet know that in the morning, 60 motorcycles were already turning off the highway toward town. The phone rang at 5:14 in the morning, and he did not answer it, because he was already awake, already sitting at the kitchen table with the coffee unmade, and it was his sergeant-at-arms calling from a number that never called that early, unless something had gone wrong, or something had already begun. "You seen it," the voice said, not a question. "I've seen it." A pause on the line, the sound of wind, someone's boots on gravel somewhere 60 miles east. Cross counties in, all of them. Boone rode over to Delacroix's place himself, woke him up, showed him the phone. He did not ask how many. He knew how these things moved once they started. Not like fire, which needed feeding, but like water finding the low ground it had always been headed toward. By 6, the landline rang twice more. By 6:30, his own phone, the one he kept for the club and nothing else, would not stop. Iron Ridge, Chapter 11. Riders, already saddled. Cross County, 19. A number that surprised him until he remembered who was riding with them. Men who had daughters of their own. Men who had stood at gravesides in leather because it was the only formal clothing they owned. Delacroix's crew, 3 towns over, a chapter he had not spoken to in 2 years since a disagreement about dues nobody remembered the reason for. 14. No argument, no negotiation, just a text that read, "Tell her we're coming," and nothing else. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched the numbers climb on a scrap of paper he had not meant to keep, tally marks like something out of a war he'd fought in another life, and by 7:15, the total sat at 60, a number that had arrived itself, unasked, unassembled by him, as if the men had taken a vote in the dark without him in the room. He thought of the sergeant's voice from the night before, flat, plain, costing something. He thought that this, 60 men deciding without being asked, cost something too, though a different kind, the kind that didn't come from confession, but from men who had watched him carry his daughter into VFW halls and diners for 11 years and had simply been waiting, patient as weather, for a reason to ride. Down the hall, a light came on under her door. He heard the particular sound of her chair's wheels against the hardwood, slow, deliberate, the sound of a person moving through a house that had rearranged itself entirely around her existence. He folded the paper with the tally marks and put it in his jacket pocket, over his heart, where the patches were, where 30 years of choices lived, stitched into leather. Outside, past the window, the sky was doing the thing it does before August breaks a heat wave, going pale at the edges, promising something it hadn't delivered yet. He heard, faint, from 3 counties away, the first low sound of engines finding the highway. He went to the window before the sound became more than a rumor in his chest. The first headlight broke the tree line at the county road's bend, then a second, then a dozen, then more than he could count without losing the thread of counting, each one riding low and slow, throttle held back on purpose, the way a man holds his voice down in a room where someone is sleeping. He stood barefoot on the porch boards, coffee going cold in his hand, and watched what 60 motorcycles look like when they are not hurrying toward anything except a decision already made. They did not come loud. That was the first thing he noticed, the thing that would stay with him longer than the number itself. No revving for show, no showboating past the church or the feed store to announce themselves to a town that would hear them regardless. Just engines idling down in sequence as they reached the gravel turnout by the fairground gates, one after another cutting to a low, steady growl, and then to nothing, boots hitting dirt in a rhythm that had been practiced across 100 funerals and homecomings, and never once for this. He counted the dismounts without meaning to. Old habit. 30 years of counting men through a door before deciding whether the room was safe. They formed the corridor without a word passed between them, the way men do a thing they have already agreed on in a place he wasn't in. 2 lines, facing inward, boots planted, forming a lane of leather and gray beards and patches sun-faded past reading, running from the gravel straight to the ticket gate, where a kid in a fair polo stood frozen mid-motion, with a roll of tickets still in his hand. The town noticed the way a held breath notices itself. Windows above the hardware store filled with faces. A truck slowed on the 2-lane and did not move again. Someone's dog stopped barking mid-bark. He watched an old woman on a bench near the funnel cake stand press a hand flat against her chest, like she was checking that her heart was still doing its job. Nobody in the corridor spoke. That was the discipline of it, the thing that made his throat go tight in a way 3 combat tours and a decade of grief had not managed. 60 men standing in the heat, patient as a held door, waiting for a girl in a wheelchair who did not yet know the shape of what was being built for her, 60 yards away. He set the coffee down on the porch rail without looking at it. Down the hall, the wheels of her chair had gone quiet against the hardwood, and in that silence he understood that she had reached the window too, that she was seeing what he was seeing, that somewhere behind him her breath had caught the exact same way his had. The engines behind the lines were still ticking as they cooled, small metal sounds in the huge stillness, like something counting down. He came down off the porch steps in his sock feet, forgetting he had never put his boots on that morning, forgetting the coffee, forgetting everything except the shape at the front of the formation that he would have known blind, by the set of the shoulders alone, by the way the man sat his bike like it was a chair he'd been given permission to use and nothing more. 26 years since boot camp, 22 since the patch, longer than that since either of them had needed words to say the hard things. The sergeant-at-arms did not gun the throttle or wave or do any of the things a man might do to announce himself. He simply took off his sunglasses, folded them once, and hung them from his collar, and that was the whole of the greeting, and it was enough. Neither man moved for a long moment. The heat sat on the corridor of chrome and leather like something with weight, and the dust that had followed the formation in was only now beginning to settle, drifting down gold and slow in the space between them, and he had the strange thought that this was what an apology looked like when it had 60 engines behind it instead of a sentence. He crossed the yard, his feet found gravel, then asphalt gone soft and tacky in the sun, and neither surface registered. The sergeant swung down off his bike with the careful economy of a man whose knees had earned the right to complain, and didn't. Up close his face was seamed with 30 years of exactly this kind of weather, and his eyes did what old friends' eyes do. They went first to the porch, to the window, to the shape of the chair he could not yet see but knew was there, and only then did they come back and settle. Neither of them said her name. They didn't have to. The sergeant's jaw worked once, and something passed over his face that was not quite grief and not quite guilt, but shared close quarters with both, and he understood it, because he had been carrying its twin for 4 years without setting it down even once, not at church, not at the VA, not in the dark with his wife's photograph turned face down on the nightstand, because he could not stand her watching him fail their daughter twice. The sergeant put a hand on his shoulder. Just that. The grip of a man who had pulled him out of worse ditches than this one, literal and otherwise, and who was not going to make him say out loud what black ice and exhaustion and a stretch of county road had cost him. "You didn't call us for this," the sergeant said. It wasn't a question. No. Didn't need to. Behind them the line held its patient shape, 60 men who had come without being asked, the way men do for each other's wounds, long before they understand the wound's true name, and somewhere behind the screen door he heard the wheels turn again, closer now, coming toward the light instead of away from it, and he understood that whatever this day was going to be, it had already started without his permission, and that for the first time in 4 years he did not want to stop it. The screen door opened on its own hinge creak, the sound of a house that had learned to announce every small movement because there was no one left inside it to be surprised. The wheels came first, then the small hands on the rims, then the face. Steady, unblinking, the face of a child who had spent 4 years learning not to ask for what she wanted because wanting had a way of costing other people something they couldn't afford to give. The 60 men did not move toward her. That was the thing he would remember longest, later, when he tried to explain the day to people who hadn't been there. They waited. 60 men who had ridden 3 hours on empty stomachs and full tanks, who could have crossed that yard in 4 strides, stood at the fence line like it was a threshold only she could open. One of them broke from the others, older than most, gray through the beard, a patch on his vest so faded it had gone the color of old rust, the kind of man who looked like he'd buried more friends than he had fingers to count them on. He crossed the yard slow, boots quiet in the dirt, and when he reached her he did not loom. He dropped down onto one knee until his eyes sat level with hers, until the wheelchair was no longer something to be talked over. "Ma'am," he said, "mind if I put my hand on your chair?" She looked at him the way she looked at everything, carefully, like she was still deciding whether the world deserved her trust today. "Why?" "Because it's yours," he said, "not mine. I don't touch what's yours without asking." Something in her face moved, small, the way water moves before it decides which direction to run. She nodded once. He rested 2 fingers on the handle, light as a man might touch a church rail, and stood, and did not push. He simply walked beside her, matching her pace, letting her own hands do the work of turning the wheels forward. Behind them, the line began to close, 60 motorcycles idling low, engines throttled down to something almost gentle, the way a big dog goes still around something small. They fell in around her, not surrounding her, escorting her, the way a procession moves for someone the town has decided, without a vote, to call royalty for one morning. Her father stood at the gate and watched his daughter roll forward into the center of 60 strangers who had become, in the space of one night, something closer to family than half the people who shared his last name. He felt his throat close around a word he hadn't said out loud in 4 years, and didn't say now either. The sergeant fell in beside him. "She's leading," he said. "Not us." Ahead of them, the fairground gate stood open, striped bunting hanging still in the windless morning, waiting for a parade no one there yet understood they were about to see. Inside the fair office trailer, the air conditioner rattled against a heat that had already climbed past what the thermometer nailed to the door could measure. The rancher stood with his hat in his hands, which was a posture he was not accustomed to, and the fair board's president sat behind a folding table with a clipboard he kept looking at instead of at the man across from him. "I'm not asking for special treatment," the rancher said. "I'm asking you to consider what 60 motorcycles parked on that midway does to foot traffic, to the vendors, to the Ferris wheel line." The president did not look up from the clipboard. "They bought tickets same as anybody." "That's not." The rancher stopped himself, started again, quieter. "My name's on that grandstand. Has been for 11 years. I built the livestock pavilion with my own money, after the flood took the old one. I remember. So I think I've earned the right to ask a question about how this morning is being handled." The president set the clipboard down, finally, and looked at him the way a man looks at someone he has known his whole life and is only now seeing clearly. "Your boy called an 11-year-old girl a burden, in front of the funnel cake line, in front of my granddaughter, who cried the whole way home. He let that sit. I don't have a question to answer for you." The rancher's jaw worked. Outside the trailer's small window, he could see the procession assembling at the far gate, the low thunder of engines settling into something that sounded, absurdly, like a hymn. He thought of the check he wrote every March, thought of his name in gold paint on the pavilion wall, thought of how none of it had ever felt like enough to make people actually like him, only enough to make them careful around him. He had built a reputation the way a man builds a fence, to keep something out, though he'd never let himself ask what. "He's 15, he said, and it came out smaller than he meant it to. He didn't understand what he was saying. Maybe not." The president stood, straightening his shirt. "But you're going to understand it in about 10 minutes, because you're going to be standing at that gate with the rest of us, watching what your son called a burden get treated like the only thing in this county worth honoring today." The rancher didn't answer. He set his hat back on his head, low, the way men do when they want their face harder to read, and followed the president out into the white morning heat, toward the gate where the bunting hung still, and 60 engines waited, and where his son was already standing, alone, at the edge of a crowd that had not yet decided whether to make room for him. The gate opened at 9, and the girl went through it first, the way a bride goes through a door she has been waiting her whole life to walk through, except she did not walk. She rolled, slow, her father's hands steady on the grips behind her, and the 60 riders fell into place on either side like a hedge grown overnight, and the crowd that had gathered along the fence line went quiet, in the particular way crowds go quiet when they understand, all at once, that they are watching something they will describe badly to other people later. She did not smile the way a child is supposed to smile at attention. She watched. That was the thing the men on either side of her noticed first, the ones who had spent years reading rooms for threat and now found themselves reading a face for something gentler and harder to name. She watched the funnel cake vendor's hands shake a little as he handed her a plate he refused to charge for. She watched a boy near the ring toss booth look away fast when her eyes crossed his, and she said, quiet, mostly to herself, "That one felt bad yesterday. He just didn't say anything." Her father asked her how she knew. "People who feel bad get quiet," she said. "People who don't feel bad get loud." He didn't answer that. He pushed her toward the carousel, where the operator had cleared the whole ride for her alone, And while the horses turned slow under their chipped paint, she asked him, without looking back, whether the man from the paper who'd taken her picture the first time, the reporter, months ago, after the accident, had ever told him what he did with it. Mac said he didn't know. She said she used to wonder if people needed to see her hurt before they'd care, and now she wondered if they needed to see this instead, 60 motorcycles, to care about the same thing they could have cared about yesterday for free. That's not fair to them, he said. No, she agreed, but it's true. At the ring toss, she won nothing, and didn't ask for a prize anyway. She only asked the boy running it what his name was, and thanked him for the toss, and watched something in his shoulders come down an inch, like a held breath let go without permission. She noticed the mothers who watched with wet eyes, and the fathers who watched with folded arms, and would not meet anyone's gaze, and she noticed, before her own father did, the boy standing near the gate in a pressed shirt too clean for the heat, his face the color of a bruise not yet risen, waiting for whatever was coming to him. Tyler's father brought him by the shoulder, the way a man walks a calf that doesn't want to walk, and the crowd near the gate widened without being asked, the way water moves around a stone it doesn't trust. He was smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed, and she filed it away the way she filed most things now, quietly, without comment. The boy who had stood over her by the funnel cake stand had seemed enormous, all shadow and noise. This boy was just a boy, sunburned at the collar, his pressed shirt already dark at the armpits, his eyes doing the thing eyes do when they have practiced apologies in a mirror, and found, in the actual moment, that none of the words survive contact with a real face. His father said his name once, low, like a cue. He didn't look at his father. He looked at her, and then at the ground, and then at her again, because the ground offered nothing back. I'm sorry, he said. He stopped there, as if the sentence should have been enough on its own, a debt paid in a single coin. When no one moved, when the silence held, he understood, she watched him understand, that it wasn't. I said that thing, he said, about you being, and he could not make himself repeat it, and it wasn't true. I don't even know why I said it. Everybody was looking at me, and you were just sitting there, and I don't know. His voice cracked on the last word, not theatrically, but the way voices crack when a boy is 14 and has never had to mean anything in public before. Josie watched him the way she watched the sky before weather, patient, unhurried, reading something the rest of them couldn't. Okay, she said. Not I forgive you, not it's fine. Just the flat, steady word, offered like a hand extended halfway across a table, close enough to reach if he wanted to. He blinked at her, thrown by how little she asked of him, how she gave him nothing to perform against. That's it? He said, before he could stop himself. What else is there? She said, not a question, and something in his father's face folded inward at that, a grown man rearranging what he thought his money had bought him. Respect, standing, a version of his son the town would admire, against the plain fact of an 11-year-old girl who had already survived worse than his boy's cruelty and had no need to make a show of surviving this too. Mac said nothing at all. He stood behind her chair with his hands loose at his sides, watching his daughter do, without effort, the hardest thing he had ever failed to do for himself. The crowd had already begun to loosen around them, the way a held breath finally lets go, when the carousel's music started up on its own timer, tinny and bright, indifferent to what it was interrupting. Josie's head turned toward the sound before anyone said a word. It was the old one, chipped horses, hand-painted, the kind the fair board had talked about replacing for a decade and never had. Her mother used to buy 2 tickets and sit sideways in the saddle behind her, one arm looped loose around her middle, laughing at nothing in particular. Josie had not been on it since the accident. He noticed her noticing. He always noticed. The sergeant-at-arms was the one who stopped the line, a single raised hand, no words, and the operator understood without being told that the ride would wait. 60 men who had been moving in slow formation for 2 hours went still all at once, the way a herd goes still, sensing weather. Mac came around from behind the chair. He did not ask her if she wanted to. He had learned, across the ruin of 5 years, that asking put the decision on her shoulders, and some decisions were his to carry. He crouched, forearms scarred and steady, and slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, the way he used to when she was small enough to fall asleep on his chest during long rides home. She weighed nothing to him. She always had. That was never the hard part. The hard part was the year after, when he could not make himself lift her at all, when every time his hands went near her she felt like evidence. He lifted her now. Her arms went around his neck, automatic, unthinking, muscle memory older than the wheelchair, older than the ice on that road. He felt her breath against his collarbone and did not move for a moment, just held her there in the space between the ground and the saddle, the carousel lights turning slow gold circles across both their faces. No one clapped, no one filmed. The sergeant-at-arms stood with his hands folded in front of him, watching the way a man watches something he has no right to interrupt, and the rest of the riders did the same. 60 men who had spent their whole lives being looked at for the wrong reasons, standing in perfect stillness so that this, finally, could be looked at for the right one. He set her onto the horse. Her hands found the pole. He kept one palm flat against her back until the platform began its first slow turn, until he was certain she wouldn't need him, and only then did he let go. She rode around once, twice, her face lifted toward the lights, and he stood at the rail watching her the way a man watches a debt finally, imperfectly, begin to come due. The carousel slowed. The crowd, which had been holding its breath in that particular way crowds do when they sense they are witnessing something they were not invited to, began to thin toward the funnel cake stand and the ring toss, giving the man and the girl room, the way water gives room to a stone. He lifted her down when the ride stopped. Her arms went around his neck again, briefer this time, and he set her back into the chair with the same care he'd used to take her out of it, checking the brake with his thumb, the way he'd done 10,000 times without thinking, the way you check a rifle's safety even when you know it's on. The sergeant-at-arms drifted the others back, unhurried, a tide pulling out. He crouched in front of her wheelchair so they were eye level, his knees popping, 41 years old and feeling every one of them in his joints. "I have to tell you something," he said. "I should have told you a long time ago." She waited. She had her mother's way of waiting, he thought, patient and a little merciless. "That night," he said, "I'd been riding since 4 in the morning. 14 hours. I told your mother I was fine to drive us home from your grandmother's, and I wasn't. I was so tired I couldn't feel my own hands on the wheel." He stopped. The carousel lights kept turning behind her, throwing gold across her face in slow sweeps. "There was ice on the bridge. I saw it too late. That was me. Not the road, me." She didn't look away from him. "I know," she said. He'd expected anger, or tears, or the silence he'd built his whole penance around. He had not expected those 2 words, delivered so plainly, like something she'd already carried and set down long ago. "You know," he repeated, "Grandma told me when I was 8. She said you'd never say it yourself because you didn't think you deserved to put it down." Her hands were folded in her lap, small and steady. "I forgave you before you asked. I just didn't know how to tell you that without you thinking I was lying to make you feel better." He put his forehead against hers, careful, the way he touched things he was afraid of breaking. "I'm sorry," he said anyway, because some words needed saying, even after they'd already been forgiven. "I know that too," she said. Behind them, the sergeant-at-arms lit a cigarette he didn't smoke, giving them the last of the privacy the fairground had left to give. He had spent 11 years building a cathedral of guilt inside himself, brick by brick, and she had just walked in and told him the foundation had never held her the way he thought it did. He pulled back enough to see her face. The light had shifted, gone the deep amber of evening settling into a fairground, and it caught the small scar above her eyebrow, the one from the windshield, the one he touched sometimes at night when he thought she was asleep, as if his fingers could undo it through repetition alone. "How long?" he said. Not a full question. He didn't have the rest of it in him. "Since I was 9, she said. "I did the math on the insurance papers. You left them on the kitchen table once. I wasn't supposed to be able to read them yet, but I could." She said it without accusation, the way she said most things, like a person reporting weather. "I didn't understand all of it, but I understood the date. and I understood you stopped riding for 8 months after, and Grandma said that wasn't like you." He remembered those 8 months as a kind of drowning that never quite finished. He had not known she'd been doing arithmetic in the next room. "I used to think," she said, "that if I told you I knew, you'd leave. Not really leave, but go somewhere inside yourself I couldn't follow. So I waited. I got good at waiting. It's mostly what this chair taught me." The sergeant-at-arms had moved a few respectful yards off, cigarette unlit now, forgotten between two fingers, watching the crowd instead of them, giving them a kind of fence made of his own back. Mac found that his hands were shaking, not from anger, not from anything he had a name for. He pressed them flat against his knees to stop it. "I don't deserve how easy you make this," he said. "It wasn't easy," she said. "It just wasn't complicated. Those aren't the same thing." She reached up and touched the collar of his cut, the worn leather gone soft at the edges from 30 years of weather and hands. "You've been apologizing to me every day since the accident. You just did it by staying. I noticed. I always noticed." Somewhere past the tree line, the generators kicked the last of the string lights alive, and the whole midway seemed to exhale at once, gold and humming, as if the fair itself had been waiting for this to finish before it allowed the night to fully arrive. He didn't trust his voice yet, so he nodded, and she nodded back, and for a moment, neither of them needed the rest of the words that were still, somehow, left to say. The weeks that followed did not announce themselves. They arrived the way weather does in that part of the county, gradual and without ceremony, until one morning you looked up and the season had already changed around you. The video kept circulating for a while, the way things do, shared by people who had never set foot near the fairgrounds and would never understand what it had cost to film it. But in town itself, among the people who had actually stood in that dust and watched 60 engines idle down to silence, it stopped being a video at all. It became something closer to a story people told each other at the feed store, at the church potluck, at the counter of the diner where the coffee was always a little burnt, the day the whole club came for the girl in the chair. The schoolteacher who had filmed it never spoke of it much, never claimed credit, but her name got attached to it anyway, the way a witness's name gets folded permanently into the thing she witnessed. The rancher did not speak of it at all. He did not call a meeting or issue a statement or stand at a podium the way he had once been so practiced at doing. What he did was quieter than that, and slower, and it took most of a month to notice, the way you don't notice a fence being mended until you walk past it and find it already whole. A concrete ramp appeared at the north entrance of the fairgrounds, wide and gently graded, poured clean and gray against the old warped boards of the ticket booth. No plaque, no name, just a ramp, where there had never been one, running from the gravel lot straight through to the midway, wide enough for a wheelchair to pass without anyone having to lift her, without anyone having to ask. Someone at the county office let it slip that the funding had come through a private account, no press release attached, no photograph taken of a man in a clean shirt shaking hands over a shovel. It was the kind of amends that asked for nothing back, not even witnesses, and for that reason, it was believed more than any apology he could have given in front of a crowd. Mac drove past it once, slow, his truck idling at the gate long enough to take it in. He didn't get out. He didn't need to. He sat there with his forearm resting on the window frame and the September light coming low and gold across the empty lot, and he thought, not for the first time, that some men only learn to build things after they've watched what it costs to break them. Then he pulled away, because there was still one more thing left to happen before the story could rest, and the club had already started talking about it. A year passes the way years do in a town like that, slow in the living, fast in the remembering. The fair returns in the same week of August, the same dust, the same funnel cake smell drifting over the same cracked asphalt. But at 11 o'clock on the second morning, something happens that has never happened before in the history of the fairgrounds. The midway closes. No announcement over the loudspeaker, no banner. Just 60 bikes idling at the gate, and a line of riders standing shoulder to shoulder in front of the ticket booth, arms crossed, waiting. For 1 hour, the rides belong to whichever child the world has tried hardest to make small that year. This year it is a boy with a burn scar across half his face who has not looked anyone in the eye in 11 months. He rides the Ferris wheel 4 times, Nobody charges him, nobody stares. The riders make sure of both. She stands at the edge of it now, older by a year, taller in the chair somehow, the enamel pin still fixed to her jacket, where it has been since the fair that changed everything. Beside it hangs something new, a small link of chain, plain steel, given to her by the sergeant-at-arms 2 weeks ago with no ceremony at all, just a rough hand and a rougher voice, saying it was time she carried a piece of the actual iron, not just the pin that looked like it. He watches her from across the lot, the way he has learned to watch her, not with worry anymore, but with something quieter, pride maybe, or its older, more honest cousin, relief. He thinks about what the club actually protects, not property, not turf, not even really its own members, though the men would say otherwise if you asked them straight. What the club protects is the hour, the 1 hour a year when a kid who has been made to feel like a burden gets to feel, instead, like royalty. That is the whole of it. Everything else, the bikes, the patches, the leather, the reputation that walks into a room before the men do, is just the delivery system for that hour. The boy with the burn scar laughs on his 3rd trip around the wheel, a real laugh, the kind that surprises the person doing it. She catches her father's eye across the lot and lifts her hand, not a wave exactly, just an acknowledgement, the kind 2 people give each other when they've already said the only things that mattered and don't need to say them again. He lifts his hand back. The wheel turns, the dust settles. Somewhere behind them, 60 engines go quiet, waiting for the hour to end, so the fair can belong to everyone again. But for now, for this hour, it belongs to whoever needed it most.